Exactly. Here to weigh in is Rich Rubino. He's an independent political analyst and author of The Great American Political Rival Challenge. And our own Tom Borelli, who is a Newsmax contributor. Welcome to Newsmax.
Thank you so much.
First edition.
Good morning.
Awesome. Great.
So, Rich, let's start with you. Donald Trump is facing more than $500 million in legal fines. What will happen to that on appeal?
That's a good question. What's actually going to happen to an appeal? I don't know the legality of that. I would just say from a purely political, cold political standpoint, the fact that these continue to go on and the fact that there will be a trial, at least on one of the cases after March 25th, is certainly not good public relations for Donald Trump. The advantage that he has is that Nikki Haley has become almost a minor candidate at this point. She's likely to lose overwhelmingly in her home state of South Carolina. Super Tuesday will be after that. There's some states where potentially she could do well in Super Tuesday, but she doesn't really have a legitimate chance of actually garnering the nomination. So he will essentially have already basically wrapped up the nomination in a pro forma sense by that time. So he can go through this entire process, and he will not have to also worry about a primary opponent. But in the general election, this is certainly something that Joe Biden is going to continue to bring up. And there are some Republicans who will say, would it be better to have somebody who does not have this baggage from a purely political standpoint? But, he definitely has a public relations problem. And that's why Donald Trump is certainly, he's calling it a political hit job. And that's why he certainly spends so much time on the stump bringing this up, spending, 15 minutes in Michigan, for example, addressing it.
Tom?
Yeah, totally agree. So everyone can agree that the former president is not going to lay down for this or go away quietly. So what's his strategy, Tom, in terms of to handle all of this going forward with respect to, we know that Nikki Haley is depending on the lawfare and the fines and everything else to cripple him, to stumble, causing him to try to stumble, in her view. But isn't he picking up more steam?
Yeah, John, I think that's a really good point because the way I see it, look, Trump was president and may be president for one really primary reason. He represents the forgotten men and women of the United States. And to the extent that there's this lawfare against him, the fact that in the case in New York, we've never seen a case like this before, just energizes those who have been forgotten by the system. America used to be a place where it was based on fairness. We'd like to see that in sports. We like to see that in politics. We like to see that in business. It's fairness. What we're seeing now is completely unfair. He's being singled out. You heard Governor Hochul essentially say that this is unique. Well, it's unique because we hate the man and we do not want to see him in power, and we will do everything we possibly can to stop him from being in power. So the way I see it is this is only going to energize his base. From what I understand, there's a group of truckers who are trying to put together a boycott not to deliver.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, a group of truckers who are planning not to deliver products to New York City. This is the forgotten men and women.
Yes.
This is the way they're going to voice their opposition to what's happening to Trump.
I want to follow up on this with both of you because Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank spoke out and said, Trump is right. Many business people in New York are going to be terrified by what just happened to me. Because the fact is, if they can do it to me, they can do it to some other big Republican business person, somebody who gives a lot of money to Republicans, somebody who takes a politically unpopular stand. After all, Letitia James has been also trying to put the NRA out of business in New York, twisting statutes to apply to them. So talk to me a little bit about what you think the fallout might be in terms of other business people in New York, contrary to what Hochul says. Tom.
Oh, sure. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I think it sends a horrible message to business people. And it sends actually a worse message for anyone who would, on the Republican side of the aisle, thinks about running for president of the United States or maybe even a higher office, because they've set a number of precedents to get the individual and also anyone who's associated with the individual. How many of former Trump associates have been tried or punished one way or another? It's really a Marxist communist trend we're seeing here, and I find it quite frightening.
Rich, can I ask Rich a question about this too? So Rich, they're asking Trump to put up almost $500 million, and he has no right to appeal until he comes up with the money, either through a bond or literally selling assets and bringing the cash into the court. Is it fair that someone's right to appeal hinges on being able to come up with that kind of money?
I mean, that's certainly the question. Obviously, Donald Trump has more money than most. I think, though, and I think it's interesting.
$500 million.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Certainly from a public relations, and that's something that's going against Trump when you hear statistics saying this can only be 13%, that type of thing. What Donald Trump really needs to do from a public relations standpoint, though, is if he wants to make it that this is that they're using a certain literal interpretation of the statute, he needs to bring out somebody who's a Democrat or someone who does not agree with him ideologically, other than Jonathan Turley, because that's the one you always hear from, or somebody who says who's somebody who is not palatable to Donald Trump or Donald Trump's message, to say this is hurting me, this could potentially affect me. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, something to that effect, because right now it is seen in very much partisan, in a partisan prism. People immediately say, well, this is Donald Trump. Businessmen, you need somebody who has a different ideological perspective to come out and make that same case. I think that would be something that would try to neutralize kind of the politics of this.
Actually, there was an MSNBC commentator a day before yesterday who raised, clearly a Democrat, who raised those issues.
Yeah, that's what he needs. That's what he needs to do. Otherwise, it's just seen in kind of a partisan prism, and he only has deleterious effects on his brand.
You know what, Tom? I always try to look at the brighter side of things. Would you say that this is actually something that President Trump can use? And what I mean by that, when you look at what just happened in Russia, Navalny actually died in prison, and you look at the charges, the trumped up charges, no pun intended, against him initially were fraud charges that they trumped up just to get him into prison for about 9 years. Then that wasn't enough. They came with more fraudulent charges to impose an additional 19 years in prison. Isn't that an opportunity for President Trump to say that while Democrats are pointing the finger at Putin and Russia, they're doing the exact same thing on American soil? What say you, Tom?
No, John, that's a great point. As we know, Democrats always accuse you of what they're actually doing. And they're always screaming that Trump's going to be the end of democracy. He's going to be a dictator. Well, look at the way they're using the entire legal system, the judicial system, to hammer one political opponent. And I want to also agree with Rich, where we need people, Democrats, to stand up and say, look, we don't like Trump, but we are afraid of what's happening to our political process. The United States of America is founded on these core principles and the rule of law. The rule of law is now being challenged because of a legal persecution. So to Rich's point, I think we need Democrats or people who are unaffiliated, business people like O'Leary, coming out and saying, hey, the system here is frightening, because if it's going to be used against Trump, it could be used against Democrats in the future. We want to maintain our system. We want to be the shining city on the hill. We do not want to be a banana republic.
So let's talk about Trump's opponent, Joe Biden. Everyone on the Democratic left is saying, well, the State of the Union message that's coming up is a chance for Biden to reset his public image and look capable and mentally competent. Do you think that Biden should agree to take a mental competence test? Let's start with you, Rich.
I don't think that he would. I don't think that would necessarily be a good idea, because he's kind of playing into the narrative. If he does that, he's saying, "Okay, I understand you feel this way." I don't think it benefits him at all politically. I do think the State of the Union address just generally is beneficial for the president, because you have a national audience. Every channel, people who would be watching something else, who are kind of apolitical, depoliticized, and are going to be watching this. Usually, the president gets a bump of about sometimes 10 to 15 points. I think, for example, Bill Clinton's address right after the Monica Lewinsky scandal in 1998, that in many respects saved him, because people said, okay, we've seen the president, this is the initiatives that he proposes, and basically we like him, and that in many respects saved him. In Biden's case, he has an extreme public relations case, because if you look at if he should be ahead by 5 to 6 points. If it was not Joe Biden, if there was a situation, he look at all the things he has to benefit. And one thing, he does not have a major primary opponent, would certainly hurt folks like Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford, and George H.W. Bush. So he has a party that, even though they don't necessarily like Joe Biden, he's not the base's first candidate. He's somebody that they're certainly palatable toward. The other thing is, there have been 14 million jobs created since he's been president. Now, how many of those simply would have been created otherwise because of the pandemic? That doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, from a purely public relations standpoint, Joe Biden needs to hammer home that message. He talks about how he brought down insulin prices, for example. These are things that are not getting out to the American public. Again, how much of this he actually deserves credit for is a secondary or tertiary issue. Public relations-wise, this is kind of his bailiwick. And sometimes, he makes a lot of mistakes when he speaks. He makes a lot of faux pas. But generally, his State of the Unions are pretty good. And he also has to show, I'll just end with this, he has to show the Democratic Party why they need to nominate him rather than somebody who is a lot younger, because there's, 16 other Democrats. They're just waiting for him to say, I'm going to be out of this race. So he has to say why this is him, why the Democratic Party needs to unite, and why independent and moderate voters should not be hesitant about his age, because 86% of the country is trepidatious about his age right now, which is really demonstrable.
So we'll have to leave it right there. However, I can guarantee you, your last comment, Rich, will be longer than this entire speech. We'll have to leave it there, folks. Take care.
Thank you so much.